appreciate the testimony. Ms. Rothrock,
yes,
how are you today? California Manufacturers Association. Thank you very much.
You all agree I should speak next? Thank you.
It seems to be the agreement, I guess,
yes.
Ms. Rothrock.
Thank you. My name is Dorothy Rothrock. I'm with the California Manufacturers and Technology Association. And while Alex was playing soccer, I was learning how to tap dance. And I can't think of a reason why that's related to climate change.
we could
Maybe by the end. Well, there is resource shuffling.
Give me 24 hours for it.
Resource shuffling off to Buffalo. All right. Before I get into climate change particularly, see, you should have been here yesterday. Before I get into that particularly, I'd like to draw your attention to the chart that I handed out to you. I just wanted to give you a status update on manufacturing in the state.
It's coming.
This chart shows our share in California of manufacturing investments for new sites or expanded facilities in the year 2013. As you see, California ranks near the bottom. Only Maryland and Hawaii have lower rates of investment when you look at our per capita levels. We have 11% of the U.S. manufacturing in the state, but are only getting 1.5% of those new investments or expansions. Now, this is manufacturing. It's not the entire economy. This is not directly responsive to points being made about the broader GDP. I just want to note that manufacturing is a particularly important sector when we're talking about climate change for reasons I'll get into. Keeping manufacturing growing in the state is crucially important because it's directly related to how well we are contributing to global emission reductions. Electricity prices are already 50% higher in California compared to the rest of the country. So for decades, really, we've had lots of incentives to be efficient in the state in the manufacturing sector. To the extent we can grow manufacturing here, keep it here, we are keeping production from dirtier locations in the country, in the world, such as China and India, where production will go, potentially could go, or expand if we are not making more of our own goods here. The irony would be if increasing burdens from the cap-and-trade program would cause that production to shift and actually increase global emissions rather than lower emissions. So moving on to the policy in post-2020, I've got three main points to make. One is that as we're setting our goal, we need to realize how different things are now than they were in 2006. We were really anticipating in 2006 that we might have a national policy. We were hoping that AB 32 would spur and inspire the development of a national policy, and we wouldn't be dealing with a lot of the leakage risk issues that we are now. I think that it's very, very important that we realize that the goals are going to become more and more aggressive, which actually exacerbates the problem that we were only experiencing a little bit in the current phase of AB 32. And I think at this point I'd just like to note that the citizens really haven't seen, and the small businesses haven't seen, the cost increases of AB 32 as the larger facilities have so far. Just this year, they'll start seeing electricity price increases, and in 2015, they'll see gasoline price increases when fuels go under the cap and natural gas overall becomes burdened with a cap-and-trade program. So in a sense, we've been in a kind of a dress rehearsal phase up to this point, and the last 5 years between 2015 and 2020 are going to be very, very significant for AB 32. So with this in mind, how should we go forward? First, we don't think that ARB has done a good enough job, nor has anyone else, if it was anybody else's responsibility, to do a really good economic analysis of the true costs of the program so far and what we anticipate it may be in the next few years. So before we look beyond 2020, let's understand the costs and benefits of what's happened so far. One of the issues that was raised a little bit earlier, the allowance allocation for manufacturing is a subject to controversy. because of what I said earlier about the importance of keeping production here in California, we don't want the limited cap on total state emissions to constrain production growth in the state. One way to actually satisfy a limited cap is to simply reduce production. And you may see companies decide, for a lot of reasons, we're just not going to make as much as we did before because we can't afford to purchase allowances for those excess emissions. That's not a success under AB 32. So by giving allowances up to an efficiency benchmark, the so-called free allowances mentioned earlier, we're guaranteeing that companies can continue to grow and expand and produce here, get the credits that they need for that efficient production, and keep manufacturing here. That's not a freebie. It's not escaping a responsibility. And I beg to differ with Bill McGavern about the refineries. They're extremely competitive in the world and in the interstate system. They're low-margin businesses. They can shift production out of state. You can import gasoline into the state, and that would actually create huge reliability problems for California's gasoline supply if we were to increase costs in the refineries excessively so that we're encouraged to shift production elsewhere. At this point, in the third compliance period of AB 32, we have an unknown for manufacturers that's causing great concern. We have free allowances up to efficiency benchmarks through 2017, but in 2018, the last compliance period, many companies, including food processors, steel company, refiners, turbine manufacturers, and aerospace firms, may have their allowance allocation drop by 25% or more. They don't know whether that's going to happen or not. The default is that it will. So right now, they're looking at potential huge costs that we could, if we got our act together and did some rigorous analysis, could make a decision that's not a good idea under under current circumstances, and we shouldn't do it. My next point is related to Dr. Robert Staven's co-authoring a good report on the way in which we ought to consider post-2020 climate policy. And his recommendations boil down to a few points. One is that we really do need to focus on the most cost-effective approaches, and in his mind, that is the cap-and-trade program. And we don't disagree with that. However, we do believe that the aggressive revenue raising in the cap-and-trade program is a cost increase that we could avoid. As you learned earlier, the cap-and-trade program guarantees we hit the target because of the declining cap, not because we sell allowances. You could distribute all of those allowances freely if you so chose to do, and you would still hit your target. You just wouldn't have a huge pot of money being received by the state. Finally, second, we need to focus like a laser on the leakage risks, as I said, because he notes, Dr. Stevens notes, that the emission reductions that we've had to achieve between 2006 and 2020 is 1% reduction per annum. If you take a straight line to 2050, as been recommended, we're looking at a 5% per annum reduction required. That's a huge increase over the rate of reduction so far. That's going to make it very, very expensive if we're not very careful. The final point that Dr. Stevens makes, which is a really good one, is that we ought to set a target that's contingent on other states and countries taking up a similarly stringent goal. We ought to be holding out the potential that California will step up and go further, but we've got to have partners. We've got to have interstate participation before we go down that road. We can't decide to just, in a sense, martyr our economy if no one else is going to take it up. My opinion for manufacturing is that we ought to take manufacturing growth out from under a firm, limited, absolute cap on emissions, because we ought to be able to actually double or triple the manufacturing in the state, because so long as it's efficient, it's taking market share from the rest of the world and actually reducing global emissions. Finally, We think it's really important for the legislature, as you're deciding to go forward, to rely on more independent analysis and marginal cost kind of discussions around the various technologies that are available to reach goals. The agencies have their roles in implementation and oversight or enforcement, but we really do need to have experts providing some independent guidance to the legislature so that you've got a full set of information about what the trade-offs are before you decide what kind of approach to take post-2020. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.